everyone. Just a quick word before we get started with this podcast. My initial plan for this conversation with Dr. Robert Malone was the approval of the new mRNA booster shots for COVID-19. A big thing in the news, obviously not being critically covered by mainstream media. I wanted to talk all about that, but we started talking about Trump, as you'll see, Dr. Malone's endorsement of Trump. I brought up Operation Warp Speed, and we did kind of a critical deep dive into how that happened and how Trump greenlit the accelerated approval of the COVID vaccines and all the complexities behind that, all the different forces that led to that decision. So we talked a lot about that, and then we went into a deeper conversation, a very rich and interesting conversation on how the FDA works, the behind the scenes, how the sausage gets made in terms of how drugs are approved, which drugs are not approved, all the conflicts of interests and perverse incentives behind the scenes that we as consumers and individuals don't really understand. So Robert provided a lot of insight into that. We even went into one of my topics that I'm covering right now, which is the FDA's rejection of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, which a lot of people are rightly outraged by. So we talked, I kind of brought that into the fold, and Robert actually provided some very interesting insights into what may or may not have led to that decision, and how the pharmaceutical industry generally has kind of captured the FDA, and how there are so many incentive structures in line that promotes a lot of big pharmaceutical companies, their drugs being approved and promoted, and smaller pharmaceutical companies with potentially innovative or life-saving products don't get a fair shake because of these misaligned incentive structures. Anyway, this is a very deep educational conversation on how the FDA works, which is not the initial plan. But I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will too. And we'll do a part 2 in the next coming weeks. We'll do a podcast specifically on the new approval of the COVID boosters. So stay tuned for that. And I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. All right. Thanks. So, Dr. Malone, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Rav. Hope you're doing well. And let's dig into it.
Let's start off actually first with your endorsement of Trump. I saw it on Twitter. Lots of people seem to be curious about your take and your opinion. Can you kind of explain briefly your reasoning for that? And was RFK Jr.'s endorsement of Trump a big part of that? Would you have done it regardless? And I guess kind of how you see the future of Trump and RFK Jr. together. And is public health a big reason for that? Like RFK Jr. has a lot of ideas about reforming public health. So I could see why a lot of people would be interested in endorsing Trump with RFK Jr. playing some kind of role within his campaign.
Well, my endorsement preceded Bobby's by a few days, just so we're clear on that. So it wasn't reaction, and it wasn't solicited in any way by the Trump campaign. At one point, I was asked to endorse Bobby, and I was involved up until the point of his declaration event in Boston. And I was there, and fortunately, the camera sought me out quite a bit when I was there. I guess I can thank Del Bigtree's team for that. I decided not to endorse Bobby for a number of reasons, even though he's a good friend, and I agree with many of his policies and positions, but I disagree with others. And as I said in my Substack, that really kind of pegged the needle with my analysis of what I saw was the recent history regarding Bobby Kennedy's campaign and his belief structure that there was such a thing as a Kennedy Democrat. There was kind of a mid-century pre-Carter version of the Democratic Party. First off, my position on this is perfect is the enemy of the good. And in the case of Mr. Trump, I share Nicole Shanahan's wish that Mr. Trump would speak to the issue of Operation Warp Speed and the disregarding and really jettisoning of well-established regulatory norms that had been built up over decades. This is one of my big objections, that and the failure to comport with well-established norms in terms of informed consent and medical ethics. These were my big objections at the start, was in confusions also, frankly. I early on assumed that Peter Marks and his colleagues at the FDA were so unfamiliar with this new technology and things like the use of luciferase as a reporter gene in whole animal scanning, that they had been, shall I say, let's see, how do I phrase this? That they had been misled by Pfizer in particular, and also Moderna in their particularly their non-clinical data packages. And there's no excuse for what they went along with in terms of the clinical trial data, except for the breaking of the blind, the destroying of the control group. These are things that tricks I've seen Dr. Fauci play in past vaccine development campaigns, including for influenza. And their behaviors that if I was to engage in as a clinical researcher, I could well expect to be reprimanded by the FDA and lose the privilege of leading clinical research in future trials. But anything that Fauci did during his career, he seemed to get away with, even if it was crossing very well defined regulatory lines. So in the case of Mr. Trump, I have the good fortune of having a number of people very close to me, in addition to Bobby, that are ex-members of Trump's president's team from his prior administration, and speak to them regularly. Matter of fact, I was with a few of them over the weekend when I was at CPAC, Mexico. And we did discuss this situation, of course, and the political ramifications of Bobby's endorsement. And we discussed ways that I might be able to help support Mr. Trump now that I'd endorsed him, and how I might be able to cooperate with Bobby in that regard, as well as discussing potential roles that Bobby might play in some future administration. So in the case of Mr. Trump, or any seasoned politician, there is very little upside to acknowledging past errors. And this is absolutely not in his psychological makeup. It's one of his, you might say it's one of his weaknesses, but like with many things with all of us, sometimes our strengths and our weaknesses are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. And Mr. Trump's insistence on continuing to look forward, not look back, not get caught up in discussions or debates about prior history or mistakes is both a strength and a weakness. And I wish that he, personally, I would prefer that he was a little more honest and open to self-criticism and to others that might share with him alternative points of view about some of the actions that were taken under his prior administration. But it's just not how he's made up. And he wouldn't be the kind of in-your-face, smash-mouth fighter politician that he is, that many of us think is what's needed in the current environment in D.C. In contrast, one of my reservations about Bobby as a presidential candidate was my sense that he was not sufficiently battle-hardened to do business with the state. I mean, we call the deep state, the administrative state. We have a lot of words around it, but we can just call it the state. And I'm still not sure that he's not a spring chicken either, nor am I. But he's even more so. Bobby, I'm referring to, as well as Mr. Trump. But going and doing battle, the kind of battle, bureaucratic battle that's going to be necessary over the next 4 years, given what's happened over the last 4, and then in the Obama administration, then preceding that, the Clinton administration, that's going to take a special kind of person, and one that is truly battle-hardened, appreciates the nature of the wicked ways that the press and the bureaucracy can cooperate and act to damage agendas and initiatives. And on balance, I have become convinced that Mr. Trump, President Trump, has the best chance of making a difference on the most of the things that I consider essential, which largely these days revolve around censorship, propaganda, psychological warfare, globalism, the World Health Organization, the United Nations. There's a lot of, and of course, the Ukraine war, the role of the United States in general, basically American imperialism, and the logic of outsourcing so much of our industrial base offshore, the need to re-onshore, the skepticism about anthropomorphic climate change. There's a whole lot of things that I am aligned with President Trump on. And the one that I'm not aligned with is the positions that he took under duress, and I think at a time where he was ill-prepared and poorly advised, except by the likes of Scott Atlas and a few others, Peter Navarro. There were people there, but they were suppressed. Their voices were suppressed by this cabal or this rampant groupthink. There's a whole, just like there's political spectrums, there's a spectrum of language that we could use to describe what took place in late 2019 and 2020, and then through the rest of the Trump administration. And of course, there was the role played by Jared Kushner, something that is often overlooked. And I can appreciate that Mr. Trump appears to have delegated issues relating to policy, the lockdowns in particular, concerning COVID-19, to Mr. Kushner. And I think that was a significant error in judgment. I can appreciate why he made it in the face of what I infer is a sense of not knowing who to trust or who to be able to turn to in the cesspool that is modern DC. But that Kushner was a bad choice. We'll just leave it at that. So I have close colleagues that are very close to Mr. Trump, speak to him on a routine basis. And they have repeatedly, some who never took the jab, some who were on death's door from COVID, and then recovered, and with the help of early treatment, early treatment that's now vilified by a local physician that's now also my physician. But they have repeatedly tried to speak to Mr. Trump, President Trump, about this and to get some movement. Trump is pretty dug in that OWS was a success, and that this vaccine product was quote vaccine product was a success. It's just highly unlikely that he's going to take some position akin to what Nicole Shanahan wants him to take if he's to get her endorsement, which is that OWS was a mistake. I just don't see how he's going to go there. I am talking to some people that are close to the campaign about nuanced ways that Mr. Trump might be able to come up with some wording, thread the needle that would be aligned with Nicole's perspective, which I respect. But that's how I see it, is in the face of a Harris-Walz, propaganda onslaught, and the prospects of what a Harris-Walz presidency would look like, administration would look like, in terms of fundamentals like the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. I think that refusing to endorse a candidate that there's a whole lot that I like about, and this one area just happens to be the area that I'm known for, but we're not aligned on that. And there is a possibility. There's various scenarios. There's no quid pro quo, but there's various scenarios about what role Mr. Kennedy might play in a future Trump administration. And by the way, the latest polling data is looking like, it's a short-term bump, but it's what we were hoping for. It looks like there may be a significant surge towards the Trump campaign with the Kennedy endorsement. So I think let's focus on the big picture, guys. You may not like the fact that Mr. Trump did what he did in the context of OWS and bypassing the FDA, allowing Peter Marks to run roughshod over established precedent, because that's what's happened. Peter Marks was one of the two originators of Operation Warp Speed. And it's a little bit of a conflict of interest that he sits atop the FDA pyramid, making these decisions about endorsing this and that, the other vaccine. I'm reading forward a little bit to our other topic, but it's unfortunate that he was allowed that degree of freedom. Peter Marks, I'm referring to. But he's been promoted to National Academy member. He's been, fast tracked, all based on the logic. And, if you unpack it, his rapid advancement was made possible, and OWS was basically justified based on the thesis of overregulation by the federal government. And Peter had promised to bypass a lot of those regulations and make it so that medical products could be authorized much more rapidly by bypassing key rules and regulations and processes. And by God, he did it. And that has been one of the agenda items for Republicans now for many years. And so in a way, careful what you wish for, because you got it good and hard. And Mr. Trump went along with that for whatever reason. I've never spoken to him about it. I've never even met him personally. I've spent some time at Mar-a-Lago. I've seen him, been close physically, but I'm not one of his confidants. So I don't know what went through his head, but I'm just not okay with taking the position of being an absolutist about OWS and the jabs. I think that myself and others, Jay included, although Jay's very conservative and cautious, have influenced the public sufficiently to mitigate the damage that was done with OWS and the inappropriate authorization of these products. And you can see that in the numbers regarding vaccine booster uptake. So that's where I stand. And I think, as I said in my essay, that really kind of went viral for a Substack. You know, got a real strong response. I think well over 1 million.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. One of the things
it's been a long, hard road for Bobby and Nicole, and I think this is perhaps the best possible outcome. And if Bobby does end up, I think, by the way, all this speculation, it was on Tucker the other day. It's new interview that's just out with RFK and Tucker about Bobby going into CIA. Don't do that. That's don't throw him into the lion's den, please. I would much prefer to see him at a cabinet level position relating to HHS, for example. I think he can do a lot of good there. And I think there are better qualified candidates to try to put a leash on the CIA.
Yeah. There was a lot there, a lot to respond to. In general, one feeling that I thought I'd express is just one of the things that repulses me the most about politics is when people just go on team red and team blue, and then they become a Trump supporter or they become Kamala supporter, Biden supporter. And that means that you have to go along with everything. You have to uncritically support the whole team agenda. And then you go to the events. There's obvious like social, psychological reasons why one would do that, right? You even if you don't agree with everything, you get invited to pro-Trump parties and rallies and events. And if you're that guy in the corner who says, "Well, I strongly disagree with this one," these 4 or 5 things. That's not.
You quickly get disinvited.
You quickly get disinvited. So being an independent thinker these days is very difficult. And that's part of why podcasts are more and more popular, is because you have some people, although a lot of people who sort of came out that way but have become less independent. There's kind of a whole spectrum of people, but there are some very independent thinkers out there, which is rare, but it is commendable when people do that. And so with Trump, I think it's perfectly rational and reasonable to make a cost-benefit analysis and say, yes, there are obvious pathological, psychological traits that Trump has. You alluded to some of it.
Not me. You said that.
And that's one thing. You talk to conservatives and you say, well, the guy often misleads, often is not honest, often does not present himself in a respectable way, and you will just see.
For whatever reason, I hang out. It's a bizarre world I live in now. I hang out with some very senior, let's say, conservatives. Most of them are increasingly reluctant to call themselves Republicans. Part of it has to do with geography. There's a cluster of kind of high-powered folks that live really close to my farm. In part because it's a refuge in this area to get out of DC. So I can tell you that many of them privately express the same kind of reservations about Mr. Trump that you're speaking of. And many of them know him quite closely. So these are not uninformed mass formation kind of responses or hypnotic responses. It's eyes wide open. He is what he is. But I really think Steve Bannon, when I first heard Steve pitching Trump for the second term a couple of years ago to CPAC, and he said the reason to vote for Trump was that he's a wartime president. In the sense of battling the bureaucracy, not battling Afghanistan, for example. I think there's a lot of merit to that. I think that when we look back, strangely, Trump's policies, he mean tweeted, bad boy. But when you look at the policies, a lot of them have improved with age, whereas that's not the case with many other administrations, particularly the stances taken against globalism, the skepticism about NATO, the withdrawal from the World Health Organization. There's a lot there to like. And will he continue those policies? I don't know. This seems to be a presidential race that is largely devoid of policy, with the exception, of course, of RFK Jr.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, but there it is. We all, these politicians are like cups that we fill with our own biases, and we assume that once we've selected Team A or Team B, we assume that it's aligned with our own biases, and I think that's a real flaw. When people ask me, Robert, do you want to take a position? Are you seeking this position? You should be at that position, blah, blah, blah. My response is, hey, I don't like DC culture. I really don't want to live in DC. I don't want to work in DC. I definitely don't want to live in Atlanta. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt. But if I'm asked to serve my country, I will do so. But it's not something that I seek. And if anybody that takes a position over the next 4 years in either administration, it's going to be a rough ride. It's going to be extremely demanding.
Yeah, I want to finish my point earlier. So I was talking about Trump and the risk-benefit analysis that you articulated earlier. I do think that is rational and reasonable.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm obviously Canadian. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not voting. But where I would land, I'm not sure yet on that, hypothetically. But there are people who you could say are also rationally coming at this to a degree, who see the Operation Warp Speed as completely disqualifying. And maybe we can use this as an entry to a deeper conversation, and we're going to talk about the FDA approval of the boosters in a few minutes here.
Yeah.
But the overall response Trump had, the political pressure put on FDA to approve the vaccines as quickly as possible in late 2020 in order to have this kind of victory for his campaign, the victorious Trump vaccine that was approved under Trump. I mean, he very braggadociously still talks about the Trump vaccine being so successful, which evokes a lot of skepticism and suspicion on many people's parts of, is this individual truly actually honest, looking at the data, or is he self-serving?
He's not looking at the data. He's responding to a political climate. All those criticisms have merit. I don't in any way reject that. And does he misrepresent things? Absolutely. Every single player in that space does. As I said, it's perfect is the enemy of the good, and unfortunately, we're yet again left with a spectrum of choices that are suboptimal. And we're left with seeking the least bad option. If I wish it wasn't so, but it is the nature of the direction that the two parties, to the extent that's even the expression two-party system in relation to American modern politics, is really a bit of a misnomer. We really do have a uniparty. It's just two different flavors of the same ice cream. It's do you want your lemon sherbet with sugar or without sugar? But it's still lemon sherbet, and
to fully flesh out this kind of devil's advocate perspective, I think a lot of people rationally fear, although maybe there could be a difference if RFK Jr. gets involved, but if there's a next pandemic, similar situation, how is Trump going to react then? Is he going to react in a very similar fashion and Operation Warp Speed the next set of jabs that are going to have their own set of side effects? I think that is a concern that many people have, and it is rational to be concerned about that, given how Trump responded to COVID.
It's So I'm going to take the Peter Marks position. I hope that that's not the case, and I hope that he's learned something, but there's no way to verify it at this point in time. Will there be more psychological bioterrorism? Absolutely, it's currently in progress. We all, people. I don't know how else to say this. This is rather blunt. You are owned by virtue of your debt, and you are being trained by virtue of these repeated rounds of intentionally promoted fear. And you're being trained like Pavlov's dogs to salivate on the ring of the bell, to assume the position, that's a little rude, when they utter the key words of global public health event. And, as soon as they started jabbering, about avian influenza and now monkeypox, I travel all the time. I'm just back from Mexico yesterday. And it's fascinating to me. You can almost tell the geographic region people come from by whether or not they use masks. And you can watch the ebb and flow of mask use globally. People now are pretty well trained, at least a large fraction of the population, to respond in stereotypic ways to the signaling about weaponized fear of infectious disease. And this is going to carry on. There's too much money being made. This is another term that's key, is disaster cronyism, in addition to psychological bioterrorism. The monkeypox is a pretty clear case of disaster cronyism. And I've documented that in the Substack with the various articles coming out from the various financial news outlets promoting this, that, or the other stock. It's really... When I was in the industry and trying to do startups and pitching business plans to venture capitalists and stuff, I used to get really pissed off at the biotechs and biopharmas that would use this pump and dump strategy again and again and again to raise capital on the prospect of highly unlikely forward-looking statements about what they were going to do for this, that, or the other new announced fear-born disease. And what they do is they suck all the oxygen out of the environment for legitimate new technology and startups. It's really quite a wicked business model, and of course it preys on average people such as our listeners here. I really, really strongly object to this. And basically, Tony Fauci would play the same game, the same pump and dump strategy, only instead of targeting Wall Street, he would target the Hill and extract cash. One of them famously was, I only need a few $100 million and I'll get you a vaccine for West Nile virus. That I find the Schadenfreude associated with his recent infection a little powerful. His recent 5-day bout of West Nile in the hospital, because he had promised Congress that if they only gave him a few $100 million, then he would have a vax for this. We still don't have one. It's just, the game just goes on and on. The same game is being played by Tedros.
Sorry, Fauci said what? I clearly did not follow this. What did he say?
Oh, are you aware that Dr. Fauci just was discharged from the hospital for 5 days of admission? For
Yes, I'm aware. But you said he said something about what? If he gave how much to
Congress?
Congress?
When West Nile really broke, and by the way, West Nile was detected by USAMRIID in birds initially, not by NIH or CDC. But when it was a big, hot issue, I mean, we had a whole round of West Nile virus fear porn, just the same as avian influenza 1.0, 2.0, H1N1, it's just Zika, it goes on and on. But when West Nile was the pathogen du jour, Tony testified on the Hill that he would be able to develop a vaccine if they only allocated a couple $100 million to him. And he promised to have it within 2 years. That's kind of the same storyline that he said for AIDS, and he said for Zika. And you can almost take his testimony for Zika and his testimony for West Nile virus and superimpose them. And it's basically, except for the fact that the value of the ask seems to go up each time. So that's what I was referring to is his prior historic promises to deliver a West Nile vaccine for the American people that were unfulfilled, let's say gently. But once they allocate the money, it just trickles into all of his little buddies and networks and channels and universities, and it doesn't matter whether or not nobody ever holds him accountable.
Right, and obviously he would argue those funds were not allocated, and therefore we didn't get the West Nile virus vaccine. Maybe if we had. Maybe
they were allocated. No, you're wrong. They were allocated.
Oh, they were allocated.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a couple $100 million.
And what happened?
3, 4. I forget what the number was. It was a big number for West Nile vaccine development, but no moss.
What happened? Do we know?
Yeah, they couldn't come up with one that worked.
Oh,
just like they couldn't come up with one for Zika. Zika and West Nile are closely related.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with this history.
Yeah, yellow fever is another one. It's hard to come up with a good flavivirus vaccine without it being live attenuated. And when you go to the live attenuated, when you go down that road, you got a lot of safety issues. Famously, if you take multiple doses of yellow fever vaccine, you'll get yellow fever.
Okay. Now, as an entry into our discussion about FDA, we talked about Trump. It reminded me in Trump's recent interview with Elon Musk on X, he talked about how during his administration, how he had accelerated the FDA approval process and will do so as well in the future. Whatever number he used previously, a particular drug, it'd take 8 years, 9 years. I shortened it to 3 years, 4 years, or even less. Also, again, a concern by people. What are your thoughts on Trump's efforts during his administration and his future?
That's Peter Marks getting into Donald Trump's ears. That's, as I mentioned earlier on in our discussion here, this is why Peter Marks was so rapidly promoted to his position at CBER, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, and rapidly promoted to a membership in the National Academy of Sciences, et cetera. So he's been another one of these that has been fast-tracked because he is saying the things that pharma wants to hear. Here's the core problem, Rav. If you may not have, I've lived this now for most of my professional life, regulatory and clinical, and so I'm really attuned to some of these nuances, but the average person isn't necessarily. The problem is that let's imagine that you have, I'll take my own situation. Let's imagine that I had maintained a position at Vical where all those initial patents were for RNA vaccines. They were filed in 1989. They issued over the next 5 to 8 years because it was controversial and et cetera, et cetera. And then they had, I guess, I don't remember, it's 20 or 30 year life. I think it's 20-year life it's after submission. So if you submit, you have a new tech or a new product, you have just discovered the keys to the kingdom for cardiac disease. Whatever that is, or erectile dysfunction or hair growth or whatever. And now you got to take that product candidate and you have to move it through the safety testing and efficacy process at the FDA. And that takes, for a trivial thing on a good day, maybe 5 years, more like 10. Well, you only got a 20-year patent life. So then suddenly every moment, every day, every hour that ticks by translates typically for a significant product to millions, to tens of millions, to hundreds of millions of dollars in lost profit. And so if you're Borla, you see this clock ticking, and the last thing you want is for the FDA to tell you that you need to do another backflip on top of the ones you've already done. And they will do anything to avoid that. Because it really hits their bottom line. And as soon as those patents expire, they're just giving money to what they perceive as the pirates that are circulating to come out, the pirates that are based in India and China, that are so good at manufacturing products, biologics and drugs. As soon as the patent even gets close to expiring, the offshore competitors are busy ramping up their manufacturing processes. So that's the reality of the situation, and so no wonder that pharma will exert, because pharma has no intrinsic moral code. They will do anything, and we've seen example after example after example that. It's the nature of the culture that's been built around the pharmaceutical industry that's largely driven by marketing, particularly since the United States has allowed, due to Senator Edward Kennedy, allowed direct marketing via mass media and particularly broadcast media in the United States. I think one of only 2 countries in the world. So pharma is totally driven by marketing, seems to have no ethical boundaries, as we've seen in the COVID crisis. They'll do anything. They'll say anything. They'll buy off physicians. They'll buy off physician associations. Hospitals. They'll do anything. I saw an estimate the other day that worldwide the bonuses that went to hospitals and hospital administrators for a COVID case comes to north of $400,000 per case over the last 4 years.
And where's that coming from? Is that coming from pharma companies, or
seems to be coming from pharma and the feds? And
how would it come from pharma?
There's a big do loop, because pharma subsidizes a variety of things, and it certainly subsidizes out to. I think it subsidizes out to hospital chains for use of their products. Like, for instance, there was a strong incentives for use of Remdesivir in a number of states. It trickled down to hospitals. But absolutely the feds, and you can't really separate the federal government from the pharmaceutical industry anymore. Those are really a public-private partnership, in a significant way, along the lines of the United States of who funds the campaigns. Just like and there's evidence that mass media, corporate media, would collapse financially if it weren't for the subsidies that it's receiving from pharma. CNN exists because of pharma dollars. And the pharma dollars don't necessarily need to promote a given drug. All they need to do is to incentivize, for instance, media, to not push out negative articles. So they're not even necessarily buying advertising space. They're buying a reluctance to bite the hand that feeds it, is the way that ecosystem works.
Right. And can you expand a little bit more?
So Trump,
go ahead.
Trump, we're in a situation where Peter Marks, in my opinion, somehow is compromised. He absolutely has been raised to his position, I think, inappropriately. And you can see that he really doesn't have the intellect and comprehension that he should have for his position by some of his statements relating. The things that blew my mind completely were his denialism about DNA transfection. This came out to fore in the context of the issue of the DNA fragment contamination. And it was a bizarre denialism that DNA could be transfected using cationic lipids, the method that's used for the RNA vaccine, which there must not be hardly any first-year graduate students in molecular biology or cellular biology that haven't used cationic lipids for transfecting DNA into cells. It was just a bizarre set of positions that the FDA took, and what it implied was that it was so egregiously wrong that it implied that Peter Marks just had no clue. I mean, he could have nuanced his positions in a lot of other ways, but to just deny that this technology can be used for delivering DNA was absurd. So I conclude from all of that in my own interactions and watching him, Peter Marks is really not qualified for the position he's in, but he's been elevated to that position because he's been spouting the logic of shortcutting well-established international precedent in terms of product development and regulatory affairs. And now he's promoting the same logic with cancer treatments. So this is the OWS for cancer that he's so heavily promoting. If we've learned anything from the COVID crisis, it's that those regulatory norms that have been built up over decades after decades of the school of hard knocks. We could go back to the 60s in Hillman in the heyday of vaccines, when you could jam through a half-baked clinical trial in a couple hundred kids and get your vaccine licensed and authorized and then mandated and deployed into school children all over the United States and the world. Those days are long gone. At least I hope they are. They were. We recognized that there needed to be a lot more work done before deploying a product, particularly a biologic, widely. And now, the whole turtles all the way down, Bobby Kennedy criticism that vaccine trials, even the better ones, have not been properly controlled and rigorously controlled, absolutely has merit. And as somebody who was in the industry designing these trials, it was drummed into my head that it was unethical to use a placebo control in a vaccine trial. I have seen the errors of my ways. That was the accepted norm and still is in the industry. And I'm completely convinced of the case that's made by Del Bigtree and ICANN Network and Bobby Kennedy and Turtles All the Way Down, that that logic, justifying that on the basis of a contrived argument having to do with bioethics is wrong. Because we're sacrificing the many because of the few, and in a marginal case for the few. So that's what's gone down. Is pharma wants less time and less expense in order to bring a product to market, and Peter Marks has been a champion of that. And so he has accelerated his position into power. He convinced Trump of this logic. And the other thread that was used to drive this wedge came from the biodefense industrial complex, which has the logic that in the face of a emergent infectious disease, whether it's engineered or emergent phenomena consequent to environmental destruction or whatever, there's a need for rapid response vaccine development because monoclonal antibodies don't work very good. and they're too expensive and too time consuming. And so we got to have vaccines, and it's too difficult and custom and time consuming to build custom antivirals, and they don't work very well anyhow. And so we need some way to rapidly produce a vaccine. And they tried the DNA vaccines. Merck dropped over $1 billion into it. Didn't work. And so then they latched on to the idea of RNA vaccines and jammed it through using DARPA money, and then jammed it through the regulatory affairs process in the context of this weaponized false narrative about a highly lethal coronavirus. And in absentia, a shout out to Jay for his early studies that clearly demonstrated that this was a false narrative, and that the 3.4% case fatality rate was way off mark. And was used to justify that. But that's how this came about, is essentially Trump was pressured both by the bioindustrial defense complex and by the pharmaceutical industry through Peter Marks to and Bob Kadlec, the two originators of OWS, says it all. Peter Marks at the FDA, Bob Kadlec at BARDA, and the ASPR, the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, was his position. So that's 3 down for the president. And these two characters both applied pressure representing their respective constituencies, and made the case that it's necessary to throw out well-established norms, and now we're living with the consequences. And so bringing it forward to the present, there's a whole another thing I'd love to talk about the position that's been advocated by Marks and the FDA regarding the coronavirus boosters and the analogy to influenza. That's their regulatory framework.
Hi, everyone. A quick word from our first and exciting sponsor, Alchemy Elements. Alchemy Elements is a powerful adaptogenic supplement. For those of you who don't know, adaptogens are a class of plant compounds, primarily herbs and mushrooms, which can help build the mind and body's resistance to stress. Alchemy Elements contains a very unique and carefully selected blend of 9 adaptogens, such as lion's mane, cordyceps, polygalaroot, and shilajit, and they can help boost energy, boost your immunity, and increase focus and overall stabilize your mood. It can have a wide array of effects, which can often depend from individual to individual, but it's a great way to start your morning and generally increase your focus and your energy levels. You can just pour 1 scoop of Alchemy Elements into your morning coffee or your protein shake or smoothie, and you're off to the races. It's a great way to start the day. I use it every day. I find that it can generally stabilize my mood levels and increase focus, especially if I want to get a big project done or finish a very important task. Alchemy Elements often is a great way to kind of start and get my focus going and get me primed for whatever task I want to accomplish. We're very excited and very happy to work with Alchemy Elements. We've been working with them for a couple of months, and now in this new iteration of the podcast, we're going to continue our relationship, which is very special to us because Alchemy aligns with our mission and values of individuals taking greater ownership of their personal, mental, and physical health, and relying less and less on corrupt and flawed, generalized kind of medical advice. And less reliance on pharmaceutical drugs, and more of general interest and focus on holistic health. For a limited time, Illusion of Consensus readers and listeners can get 10% off their first order using the code word Illusion, or 30% off a subscription monthly order where you can get a monthly shipment of alchemy elements delivered to you. For the subscription orders, you can also get with it a bonus gold kit to store your alchemy elements. Overall, I think Alchemy is a fantastic product. I highly recommend you check them out in the link below in this podcast, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, Substack, Rumble, or YouTube. Just go to the link, use the code word illusion, and you can get your discount and you won't regret it. Yeah, but before we go there, so when it comes to Operation Warp Speed, you're saying those 2 or 3 individuals, they originated Operation Warp Speed, and they
Two guys.
or two
Bob
two individuals.
Earmarks. That's who did it.
Yeah. So they originated Operation Warp Speed and then brought that idea forth to Trump, and then he signed off on it.
There was a whole. As you know, I've spent 4 years now trying to dissect what the hell went on, and I'm in my second book on that now, the Cywar book. The first one was Lies My Government Told Me. Me and so many others have tried to understand in written books and done analysis about what transpired. But when you unpack it all, there's certainly a strong component of groupthink. You had a classic groupthink dynamic of a bunch of insider individuals that had long-standing relations with each other. I'm talking about business or professional relations. I can't speak about any of the other things, but this was a clique. And there was some dissenters within the clique that were kind of pushed to the outside. And then there was an inner clique, that was able to effectively control the president on this topic area. And also, with the president delegating to the vice president and to his son-in-law, then, Rav, that the American president is, bless their hearts, they are almost completely controlled by their chief of staff. Everything that you think we're subjected to Cywar and information control, the president only gets the information and gets to talk to the people that the chief of staff lets him talk to. And that's kind of the way it goes. And then Trump compounded that with his tendency to not want to listen to intelligence briefings or read documents, etc. So that's another one of his character flaws. He's not an intellectual detail guy. That's the truth of the fact. So largely you had these 2 advocates representing, in many ways, 2 interrelated or interrogating industries: the pharmaceutical industry, biopharmaceutical industry, and the biodefense industrial complex, both pushing, we have the solution. We just have to apply this new tech that has come out of UPenn. Remember, that was the storyline. Forget about what was done a decade before. It's all new and has been developed by DARPA and capitalized by Intel, QTEL, etc. So what's not to like? And here's the perfect opportunity to prove it, to prove that we have the technology in this space with the biodefense related issues. Appearances are thought to have significant value. So the appearance that a nation state or a defense consortium like NATO has a certain capability, let's say anti-missiles or space warfare or whatever the thing is, or RNA vaccines, to rapidly respond to a threat agent of some kind will make it less likely that threat will ever manifest. That is the logic inside this kind of industry, is appearances are almost as important as reality. And so promoting a rapid response RNA platform technology, whether or not it actually is safe, let alone effective, that alone would have significant value in the battlescape that is envisioned. I mean, they have, if you open up your mind a little bit and get out to the edge, warfare is being transformed right now. They are piloting AI autonomous battle drones in the Ukraine right now. Okay, it is Terminator 2.0 right now, and the Navy is pulling its hair out because their fleet is suddenly obsolete, and the new warfare involves autonomous battle drone swarms, increasingly miniaturized, and the use of weapons that will emit electromagnetic radiation, so electromagnetic surge weapons to basically destroy all electronics within battlefield range, and then the countermeasure is hardening that. And once you go down that road, then you quickly find that you don't have many options other than chem-bio warfare. And that's where this is driving. It's ugly. It is dark. And the biowarfare treaty is like cheesecloth. It's so full of holes. It means nothing. And so in that future battlescape that they're all, you got to understand the military is operating 10 to 20 years out on the horizon in terms of technology development. They are literally using Ukraine as a proving ground for drone warfare, just like they used Vietnam and Cambodia as a proving ground for rotary wing aircraft warfare. So the next horizon is chem-bio. Despite all the jabbering about how unethical it is, they're kind of, that's what we're going to have to do. Because the Chinese are going to do it, right? That's always the rationale, is the same mutually assured destruction logic. If we don't do it, they'll do it, and they're going to do it anyhow, so we might as well go ahead and do it. In our books, we've documented these manuscripts and publications and studies from NATO that in Germany and the UK that flat out say we have to do this stuff because we think the Chinese are going to do it to us. And so that's where, everybody's jabber about how bad the DOD is, and the DOD is behind this, and it's all a depopulation agenda. And I'm not saying there isn't a depopulation agenda going on. That's pretty well documented with the Kissinger report and other things, but I don't think that's what's driving the RNA jamming this technology through. I think it has a lot more to do with the perception of the nature of war on a 10 to 20 year horizon.
I want to spend a couple minutes before we get to the actual topic, which I originally want to talk about, but I'm really glad we're going into depth in some of these areas. I want to spend a couple minutes, and I just kind of refresh my understanding of this. I looked up this NBC article from 2017 about how Trump met with CEOs of several big pharmaceutical companies and promised to cut FDA regulation, making it easier to get drugs approved. Trump also signed an executive order mandating that agencies cut 2 regulations for every new regulation without making it clear how they could do so, and he wanted to streamline the FDA. And this one particular quote from this director of public health research group, Dr. Michael Carome, said, quote, President Trump's preposterous promise to pharmaceutical company CEOs to slash FDA regulations by 75 to 80% would, if fulfilled, fundamentally destroy the ability of the agency to protect patients and consumers from unsafe or ineffective medications and medical devices, hazardous food and dietary supplements, and dangerous tobacco products, among other things. the end result would be countless preventable deaths, injuries, and illnesses across the U.S. Very interesting.
I remember when that was going down. By the way, the dangerous tobacco products is a code word for the little packets. What do they call them? Snooze or something like that, and the vaping. When that was all, that's when that was going down, and they were launching the new tobacco division at FDA. But this, Pharma owns DC. They own both parties. They capitalize our elections all the way down to dog catcher, practically. Certainly down to local politics. And Mr. Trump is far from being an angel here. Your criticism, implied criticism, absolutely has merit. And as I tried to gently say earlier on, we're left choosing between the devil and the deep blue sea, metaphorically.
Honestly, for the sake of this conversation, let's just put aside the political dimension. That's less interesting to me. When it comes to FDA regulation, what are your thoughts on how in 2017 Trump was telling CEOs of pharmaceutical companies that he would cut regulation, putting Trump aside?
As I've been saying, this is exactly what they want to hear. I'm saying, if I was to say that, well, you can't separate the politics from the policy here. This is messaging that I will give you something that you want in return for your support. I don't know how else to say it. It's that blunt. It's that egregious. And it is absolutely a dark aspect of the Republican thrust vector relating to deregulation. But there are positive aspects to that deregulation agenda also. And I think that with the Supreme Court decision recently having to do with the Chevron deference, overturning Chevron deference, which was what enabled the growth of the administrative state. It enabled executive branch administrative departments to functionally make law, as opposed to relying on Congress to do so. I think that a lot of that deregulation agenda will proceed in an appropriate way, and a lot of that stuff will get unwound over the next decade, consequent to lawsuits. But Trump's advocacy for this absolutely aligns with Peter Marks' position, and I think you have appropriately identified that thread going back in time. That Trump's openness to OWS may well have been foreshadowed by those policy positions. And in terms of the agency, FDA, I'm speaking of, not CIA. In terms of FDA, a number of vectors have come to bear on the FDA, not the least of which is that a very large fraction of their funding now comes from pharma directly in the form of fees and basically fee for service. And all that was justified based on the thesis that the taxpayer shouldn't have to pay for federal oversight of development of new drugs. And that the industry should pay. But that, you could say that was another psyop. That plays right into the industry's hands and has done so very effectively. The people that work in pharma that are pulling in these big six-figure salaries plus, they're not stupid people. They may be sneaky, nefarious, and unprincipled, but stupid they're not. and they can see a variety of ways to manipulate the system to their gain, and they do so. And advocating, playing into the Republican narrative of overregulation, the need for reduced regulations, was a very savvy position to take, and just as the problem we see with dual agency at the USDA, at the CDC, at the FAA in terms of Boeing, this core problem of dual agency, where federal regulatory bodies both promote the industry and regulate the industry, that has got to stop. That is, if you go up to 40,000 feet and look down at the U.S. government, I don't know about Canada, you got your own issues, but that is a core systemic problem across all of the U.S. government right now. Is the regulatory apparatus is captured, and FDA is clearly captured by Pharma, and that has accelerated under the Biden-Harris administration, but it also accelerated under the Trump administration. That is absolutely a valid criticism, Brandon.
Yeah, and I want to probe into that a little bit more, but just to go back to what I was trying to ask you, again, putting aside Trump, because I'm more interested in the substance, what do you make of deregulation of FDA? Is there any kind of silver lining? I mean, the argument for, as I understand, is that, well, we want drugs to be passed quickly because there are serious diseases. People are dying of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, etc. So maybe there are drugs out there that need to be expedited so that more lives can be saved, etc. Therefore, we should accelerate the process.
I'm going to argue your side, okay? Yeah. Based on past precedent, and I have previously. For a innovator, whether it's large or small, in this industry, it's increasingly become the norm to offshore your development. Now, that is ethically complex and tortuous landscape, because functionally what you end up doing when you offshore your development is you offshore it to poor, underdeveloped nations and individuals that are disadvantaged in a variety of different ways. So this is, export your product development and clinical trials to Africa kind of strategy, or Greece. And favorite strategy has been go to the European Union, offshore your development to the European Union, or India, by the way, offshore to the European Union. And EU has a funny path that you can go to individual nation states. So that would be akin to doing your product development in Texas or Tennessee or someplace. And then once you had your data set and authorization for that state, using the metaphor, or for Greece, then you can kind of grandfather it into European Medicines Agency and the European Union in general. So that was the old strategy. And the consequence of that is that those offshore entities would often have access to breakthrough pharmaceuticals much earlier than established Western nations, and particularly the United States, would, because the FDA would hold back. The developers would go offshore. FDA would throw up their, usual. You're going to have to do this, that, and the other thing. So, like, for instance, here's a great example. You could go to Australia, and the Australian government would basically capitalize your phase 1 studies. And in many cases, you didn't even have to have an IND for phase 1 in Australia, because they wanted to have more pharmaceutical R&D going there. And so you could offshore to Australia, get your phase 1 trials subsidized. So that's $500,000 to a couple $1 million. Thank you very much. And then take those data sets back to your investors and leverage that for additional capital and then go to Greece or wherever you're going to go, that also has a lower cost structure, and gradually work up the ladder until you have a product that's now generating revenue because it's licensed in, name your place, Azerbaijan or whatever, Romania. So you're starting to generate revenue there. You're not just cash flow red. And then you can take those data sets into the FDA, and then all you have to do is a validation study in the United States to show that Americans don't behave any different than Aussies or Romanians or whatever the thing is. That's how the industry thinks. So the consequence of that kind of ecosystem is that access to new drugs and solutions is it for Americans or North Americans is limited only to those who can afford to go to country X for that breakthrough treatment. So this ends up in medical tourism, which is restricted largely to upper middle class and upper class people. So we end up with the absolute cutting edge breakthrough cancer treatments. I'm a wealthy guy and my wife has breast cancer. Where am I going to go? Oh, off to Switzerland, right? And for the rest of us, poor souls, we get to suck it up and read it in the medical journals and hope that it eventually trickles down to our children.
Just to interject for a second, like two examples I can think of is stem cell therapy and psychedelic therapy. You see a lot. There's therapies that I see a lot of promise in, particularly the latter. See people going to Mexico to get their stem cells on their knees, avoid a surgical procedure, or instead of taking SSRIs and conventional psychotherapies, they go to South America and do ayahuasca or psilocybin or MDMA, etc. Yeah, those are just two examples of that.
Yeah, no, good, solid examples. And so particularly the sports medicine, stem cell, alternative therapies, hydrotherapies, there's a number of things that the wealthy are able to tap into that the likes of you and I can only listen to the breakthrough stories. So that's just the nature of things right now in the system. So there is a middle ground here. There is a way to square the circle, I believe, and it has to do with a limited marketing authorization. So I think the way that we responsibly enable and Ron Johnson and others tried to do this through the bill that was passed for right to try, particularly for cancer drugs. But I think the way that could be done to move forward on this is for FDA to essentially require phase 1, phase 2 level data plus non-clinical safety data to establish sufficient safety in humans and some indicator of efficacy. Remember, you don't prove efficacy until phase 3. Phase 2, you get a rough estimate of efficacy. It has to do with the statistics of powering studies and the challenges associated with that. Because you've got to rely on your old data set in order to power your new study to generate your new data set. And that's why it's all stacked like the way it is with larger and larger sample sizes, is because you don't want to expose a lot of patients to potential risk or failure to treat with something else that might be more effective until you have a reasonable statistical chance. And you only can determine that reasonable statistical chance by doing a smaller population. And so you got to kind of stack small on top of medium on top of large. And then you finally get to proof statistically, and you have to have you have to power your trials so that you can detect the effect. And so, unfortunately, we're in a world in which we have diminishing returns for most pharmaceutical pathways. And so you're getting less and less of an effect relative to existing standard of care. And so you're statistically boxed in comparing against a typically a moderately effective standard of care. And so then your study sizes just blow up because you've got to prove statistically that the new thing is sufficiently better than the old thing, and that the old thing is partially effective. So it really puts you in a box. And the way out of this, I think, is limited marketing authorization with rigorous requirements for tracking and reporting. So if we had an FDA that wasn't emasculated and wasn't staffed by English as a second language immigrants that, we could argue about how well they're trained. If FDA was paying like Silicon Valley pays for the top minds from all over the world, whether they're from Bangladesh or French leading French universities, the FDA would have the talent to see through any obfuscation or manipulations that pharma might wish to throw at it. Of course, they will, but just like they did with COVID. But if we have quality people in there that are adequately compensated, that stuff isn't going to slip between the cracks like it did with COVID. And so then we could have a limited market authorization. So essentially your phase 3 trials are run in an environment in which people are actually paying for use for the product. So then the pharma is generating revenue. So that helps them with the expiration of the patent problem. It helps them defray the $1 billion plus hit that they take with phase 2-3, and it allows patients to have access. But the requirement to do that is that you must have rigorous informed consent. So you have to disclose to the patients that would participate in that environment the good, the bad, and the ugly in language that they can comprehend. And then you have to have rigorous independent monitoring and data analysis. But, in the scheme of things, that's not a big expense compared to putting millions of people at risk. If we want to use as the comparator what happened with the COVID crisis. And this is a strategy that could have been done with COVID. So that's if I was Rav, to be blunt, I don't want to be in DC, but if I got the ring, Robert, we really need you and we want you at someplace in HHS because Bobby calls me and says, Robert, I can trust you. I can trust you, and I think you're my friend, and I don't think you can be bought off. And he said, where could you be used best? I think FDA is the place. And there's a number of, it doesn't have to be head of the FDA. There's a number of places I could be effective at the FDA. And if I was in a position where I had some operational authority, this is the kind of thing I would want to pursue is as a kind of a middle ground that would, be informed by what pharma needs, be informed by what the American consumer needs, be informed by not, the ethics of offshoring drug development, if you start unpacking that, are really quite wicked. As I said, you're basically offshoring risk to poor people in underdeveloped countries. That's what's really going on. And we can pretty it up and put a smile on it, but it's still ugly. And I think fundamentally unethical. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons why that kind of a strategy that I've just outlined could be a way to thread the needle in a very challenging environment, but it's got to be coupled with fundamental change in terms of the rope that we're giving the pharmaceutical industry to influence politics and the consumer. We have got to get we've got to end the ability of the pharmaceutical industrial complex to control politics and control media.
And the current state of FDA affairs, I mean, I just referenced this NBC article, Trump in 2017 vowing to slash 75 to 80.
Affairs, from what I hear, is the buildings are bloody empty. Nobody's coming to work. Everybody's working remotely. There's, nothing gets done. It's compromised and largely staffed by, I hate to sound so racist, Chinese. It's largely staffed by folks that have not been through Western training, for whom English is a second language in many cases. This is not the creme de la creme. And that is going to be a long-term problem. You have people that are really second and third tier minds, because who wants to work for the FDA? The only reason to work for the FDA is to get out after 3 or 4 or 5 years and go make real money with the pharmaceutical industry, or just kind of occupy your chair and wait it out until your pension kicks in. And that's kind of I'm sorry, I'm probably offending tens of thousands of work-at-home employees right now, but that's kind of the profile of the operational side of what's going on at the FDA.
And why is the Chinese worker thing significant? You're saying second, third-rate minds from China?
They are.
What is that?
This is English as a second language. These are not people that are they're coming out of Chinese training systems, which are not as rigorous as Western training, whether it's pharmaceuticals, medicine, or anything else. A Chinese MD does not go through the same rigor as a Western-trained MD does.
Okay. And to my question, what I was trying to ask was the current state of FDA, and I appreciate the insights you've given on that. But in terms of the current regulatory affairs at the FDA, right? When I mentioned what Trump was vowing to do you think currently, he said he moved drug approvals from 7-8 years down to 2, 3, 4 years. Do you think the FDA is too quickly approving drugs and there's not enough regulation? Should there be more regulation?
What I'm hearing from my colleagues that are prosecuting drugs right now is, as you said in your lead-in, it has become arbitrary and capricious, and it seems to be the big boys get greased skids, and the smaller innovators are raked over the coals and have to cross all the T's and dot the I's multiple times.
But it's what we saw with the MDMA decision, which I don't know if you follow that carefully, but recently the FDA rejected approval of
it. Entirely
MDMA
aligned
therapy.
with that. Entirely, and I know of other developers that are experiencing this in real time. Imagine you're the small to mid-size innovator, and you're coming into that environment that is extremely threatening. And you have the probability is very high that when you interface with your review committee, there are no senior people there. And the majority of those people that are there on that committee are English as second language, marginal in terms of their experience and comprehension and communication skills. And
really, that is just shocking to me.
That's what I hear is going on routinely. Okay, what's happened is there's been a hemorrhage of senior talent, which means all of the old graybeards and experience and kind of balance but also the bias. Looking at it on the positive side, one of the things that's kind of historically a problem with the agency is that you have long-standing people in certain silos that have biases about this or that category of drug or this or that regulatory strategy or whatever that won't change. They won't respond to changes in information, science, etc. They're dug in their position, and they are the old guard can really be an obstacle to innovation and change. But now, what we have is a situation in which the positive side of having experienced, more senior people is not there. There's a combination of the age factor and the boomer wave retiring out, and staffing now with folks that are kind of have a short-term mentality, and who wouldn't? If you're trying to make a buck and hoping the Lord will buy you a Mercedes Benz, obviously a tip of the hat to Janis Joplin. That you're going into this just like the ones that go into Patent and Trademark Association. That's another revolving door, where you go in as an attorney and do your 3 to 4 years and then get out and join a big law firm. That's the business model. That's what drives DC, and that's what's compromised the FDA. So as I say, the American public thinks that they're getting a deal by outsourcing to contractors and that. By the way, that's another factor of what's gutted the FDA is subcontracting to staffing firms. So you don't have people that are really full on gubbies with the incentives associated with that. So there's a whole lot of dynamics that have basically gutted the talent pool at FDA and led to a situation in which the review groups are staffed by inexperienced people that aren't particularly committed to the historic ethos of FDA as it's kind of positioned itself as the agency that blew the whistle on thalidomide. That's kind of their self-image. Is we responded to the thalidomide crisis more efficiently than Europe did, and that shows that we have integrity, and it's important that we maintain that integrity. That's kind of the cultural ethos that the FDA was built on, and that's gone now.
And can you explain a little bit before we go into the booster topic? Can you just explain for listeners on why it is that the big guys, the big pharmaceutical companies, find it so easy and accessible to approve their drugs, whereas the little guys, recently, people can watch my 4-hour, did a panel on the podcast with a member of the FDA advisory committee who voted against the approval of MDMA therapy, and then a top psychedelic researcher at Johns Hopkins. And we talked about some of these complexities of how Pfizer and Moderna got such an easy ride for COVID, granted EUA, emergency, COVID crisis, whatever, but other kinds of drugs like MDMA, psilocybin, this whole psychedelic world, they find it very, very hard. And these are smaller pharma companies. So, can you explain why there's such a big disparity in treatment for small companies versus big companies?
Well, I'm sorry to be so blunt. The large pharma acts like a cabal. And if you're a regulatory officer at the agency at FDA, and you take a rigorous position relating to a product in development from any of the members of the pharmaceutical industry, that gets known. And so your ability to employ the exit strategy revolving door and go take the $500,000 plus salary after you've done your 3 to 4 years is compromised if you are being rigorous with bigs. With smalls, nobody cares. So there's that. Now, the comparison that you're referring to, emergency use authorization versus standard pathways, that's a little bit contrived. Because the EUA is a particular bypass. So you can, it's kind of a I'm thinking the monopoly metaphor. You can go collect your $200 and pass go. With emergency use authorization statutes passed by Congress have basically authorized a FDA regulatory bypass. And that's Congress. And that was done, goes back to Cheney and all the fear porn around anthrax and then smallpox that gave birth to the modern biodefense industrial complex. And they were, those that are in that sector were able to exploit a particular logic, and that's now being further exploited and expanded based on the thesis that emerging infectious disease is really the same problem set as engineered pathogens. The original justification was the bad guys, undefined, are engineering bad stuff, and they're going to deploy it on the American people. And so we have to mitigate that risk by showing the state and non-state actors that we had a rapid response capability. So just like I was expressing earlier, the appearance is almost more important than the substance. So the emergency use authorization pathway was built for a variety of reasons: strategic, tactical, practical. And just like a lot of what was done under the Patriot Act, it was a moment in time that was effectively exploited to advance a variety of agendas, not all of which were legitimate, including the financial interests of the biodefense industrial complex. And so we ended up with statutes, congressionally approved statutes. You know how hard that is to get through? It's wicked hard. Congressionally approved statutes that basically bypass decades-old established norms for informed consent. They wrote in bypasses, soft bypasses for informed consent. You're still supposed to disclose to the best of your ability. It's soft and squishy language. But even that was just jettisoned. It was just, we don't care. Who's gonna stand against us? It was like a lot of things over the last 8 years in American politics, it became catch me if you can, I'll see you in court. 2 years later and $10 million. Good luck suing the federal government. This is why the Chevron deference decision is so important. It's because basically the administrative state was able to do pretty much whatever it wanted to under the old rules.
Yeah.
And so that's absolutely the case with the emergency use authorization pathways. that kind of a bypass doesn't exist statutorily. There's still, the semblance of the old FDA for most drugs, and then there's this differential enforcement for the reasons that I've described to you, and a lot of that has to do with the unwritten incentives that FDA reviewers have to go soft on the big boys.
Yeah, you've talked about one particularly, about the revolving door problem. Are there other incentives?
Other incentives for what? For a regulator?
For going soft on the big pharmaceutical companies. We talked about revolving door. What are there any other big incentives for why there's this perception?
Remember,
why,
Pharma
this reality
is the one
that
paying
big
the bill.
Pharmaceutical companies get a very easy access to their approval of drugs.
Big Pharma is the one paying the bills. So functionally, Big Pharma is FDA's sponsors. The little boys, not so much.
Right.
So there's because Pharma capitalizes the political structure. That means that Pharma has special. You mentioned Trump putting pressure on the FDA. Well,
yeah.
The name of the person was Azar, wasn't Trump. Okay, and he absolutely. I could give you examples of Secretary HHS directly pressuring FDA to advance the vaccine products more rapidly. And that didn't come from the desk of the president. That came from the desk of the Secretary of HHS, who had close ties with Pharma. So, the way this ecosystem works is, I could pull a name out of a hat. If I'm the CEO of multi-$100 million capitalized, market cap, mid-size pharma, and I have a major donation to a senator, my state senator. All I got to do is pick up the phone. Senator Joe Schmo, the FDA is just giving me a lot of shit, and it's just a pain in the can. It's going to cost me money. It's going to cost jobs, and I need you to go have a meeting with the director of the FDA or whomever, and they get called in. And if they don't respond, then they get called up for hearings. It's just a whole lot of ways to put pressure from above in this system. Whether it's coming through the executive branch or it's coming through the legislative branch, and now that's the dark side of the Chevron deference decision. Is now Pharma can push that the regulations that are being imposed on it represent non-legislative branch administrative lawmaking. And I guarantee the FDA is susceptible to that argument because of how they're structured. One of the things that non-U.S. regulatory folks don't always understand, and it's very different from European Medicines Agency, and I don't know about Health Canada, but Health Canada is probably more like EMA. The legislative authorization for the FDA differs significantly from that of Eurosocialism in that the FDA is placed in the position of consenting, whereas in the European system, the EMA can direct. So if you look at regulatory guidance from the EMA, they'll say, you'll do this test, and then you'll do that test, and then you'll do the other test, and then you'll show us the data, and we'll think about it. Okay? If you look at regulatory guidance from the United States FDA, it says, basically paraphrasing, well, we suggest that you do this, and then that, and then the other thing, but it's really up to you. And if you can justify a different pathway, then we will listen to you. It's non-directive. The slang in the business is the developer proposes and the FDA disposes. Whereas in Europe, the EMA proposes. The EMA tells you what you're going to do, and you do it. And it's a lot more straightforward, but it creates some problems at the edges if you're an innovator. So it's a different regulatory space. The FDA is in this they hold a very weak hand, technically. And then there's all of the other aspects of, as you were speaking of your colleague that you had on the show, the advisory boards often have, all of academe has various forms of surreptitious cooptation. From the level of pharma sponsoring their medical specialty board groups, down through the hospitals, all the way down the food chain. And just like pharma sponsors the whole political spectrum. So in terms of the perverse incentives in the arbitrary and capricious behavior that you're referring to, where you have these strange differentials in application of standards and norms, it's a complex matrix of vectors that have this combined output. Now, that's another thing. It would be a lot more fair. I'm increasingly in the Austrian School of Economics point of view that the state is a bad idea in a lot of ways. And at a minimum, we should have a minimalistic government. That's the micro-cap version versus Murray Rothbard's anarcho-capitalistic point of view that is the true Austrian school. But a case can be made that drugs development and testing is an appropriate role for the state. And probably most of us would prefer to have some agency providing oversight on our behalf, because we don't have the technical skills. It's like the problems faced by the young parent as they're making vaccine decisions these days. But if we're going to have the state acting in this way, it needs to be a neutral arbiter. It needs to be equitable and balanced if it's going to serve as the guardrails, and not readily swayed by these external influences, because that it compromises, as we've seen, faith in the system. We're now in a situation where we kind of don't believe anything, especially about vaccines. As a general population, we don't trust the FDA. We don't trust the CDC. We don't trust Pharma. It all seems to have gone to hell in a handbasket because of this problem of arbitrary and capricious behavior. And if we're going to have the state in there, and I think there's a case to be made for, if not jettisoning, then severely restricting NIH budgets and CDC budgets. I think they're way beyond their mandate. But now
you were talking about the funding of the FDA. Now you're referring to the fact that the biopharmaceutical industry gives 75% of the FDA's drug review budget. That's what you're alluding to there.
Yeah, in the form of fees and other capital.
Now, from what I understand,
and
the argument for that is that allows drug companies to get faster review and approval of their drugs,
that's
so
bullshit.
they can pay.
That is pure bullshit. This is a case of you get what you pay for. This was originally justified as a cost-saving measure for the taxpayer, and this argument that you're making is basically more propaganda.
But this is not my argument. I'm just articulating what the argument is given.
Fair enough. The argument that you are appropriately voicing,
yes,
I submit, is propaganda promoted by the pharmaceutical industry because it's convenient for them to justify what they find to be a useful policy position.
So the pharmaceutical company, they're providing 75% of the budget, so that creates for an obvious conflict of interest.
Yeah,
you're saying,
and it's a bargain for them. Compared to the billions that they're having to spend to bring a product to market, the cost of it, just one phase 3 trial, the fees that they have to pay to pharma are modest. And there's been all kinds of interesting incentivization strategies, for instance, for bringing orphan drugs forward, where you get vouchers so that you can get expedited review and you get to jump the queue compared to the other guy. They've created a web of complexity and ways to manipulate and bypass, and it's all just turned into a great big mess. Let's just cut out the BS and say, this is what you have to do. It's going to be evaluated rigorously. We're going to give you a opportunity to bring your product to a position of revenue earlier, but it's going to come at a price. You're going to have to be rigorous with your data collection and your informed consent, and we're going to be all over you like flies during that phase while you're gathering the definitive data, and then God bless you. Go to market. But all of this kind of half-baked justification for this little nuance and that little strategy, and it's turned into a great big mess, and nobody's quite sure what's what.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, you're saying there could be this process of, if you want an expedited review of your drugs, you get more rigorous standards imposed on you? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying if you want to bypass the normal phase 1, 2, 3, then licensure pathway, then open up a channel for phase 2, 3 combined studies in which you have a limited market authorization so you can start selling your product into the marketplace, but it has requirements in terms of tracking, monitoring, because you're functionally still in something it's almost akin to an emergency use authorization strategy with strings.
Okay.
Right? It's akin to the intent to try, but with more rigorous requirements for tracking so that we can gather the data and we can make an informed decision about whether or not the product is safe and effective. And it allows the developer to get the large database, because that's one of the big problems here, is that most of these drugs are marginally more effective than the ones that they're trying to displace, which means they have to go to massive trials. So I'm suggesting there may be a way to thread the needle to meet pharma's needs, to avoid this offshoring that is ethically inappropriate, to enable the consumer in the United States, the patient, to gain much earlier access to potentially life-saving therapies and treatments in a controlled environment in which there are more rigorous data collection requirements and data analysis requirements. And that is a hybrid solution that might address these multiple kind of competing forces that are vectors that are impinging on the agency at this point in time. But that's also got to be complemented with an awareness that we have to have a regulatory body that isn't positioned as a dual agent. In other words, it's not promoting the pharmaceutical industry while it's regulating it, and it is staffed adequately with people that are adequately compensated, so that you can attract high quality talent, top tier talent. There's, for instance, the application of modern data analytical techniques, including some of the newer information technology, including artificial intelligence. How do you think FDA is going to compete for brain power with Silicon Valley? No bloody way.
Right.
Okay. The only way that's going to, one of the things that an administration needs to do, in my opinion, is sometimes leaders have to tell people things they don't want to hear. And one of the things that they need to hear about the FDA is you get what you pay for. And if you want to go cheap, you're going to get a cheap product. If you want to cut rate FDA, you're going to get cut rate oversight, and you're going to have to deal with the consequences. If you want to have truly safe and effective drugs, then pay for it. Stop yapping about it and complaining, and stop trying to offload the cost to the pharma, which only comes back to you in the form of expenses, which, of course, then get covered by your insurance, and then that jacks up your insurance price, and it gets covered by the federal government, and that jacks up your taxes. I mean, everybody thinks they're going to get a freebie here. Sorry, It doesn't work that way. You get what you pay for. Yeah. And if you want quality oversight so that you don't allow pharma to jack the FDA around,
game the system,
and you got to pay for it. And you got to insist that the system be cleaned up. And that if you're going to have rules, they should be applied equitably and consistently, whether you're big or small or in between. The pharma should be able to think about the poor small to mid size and their capital. Right now, if you're a small to mid angel or friend and family kind of investor, or small venture capital shop, and some innovator from your region is coming to you with a new business plan or with a product for Series B investment or whatever, and they say, well, this is the way it's going to be, and we can get these things done at the FDA, and this is how much it's going to cost. You got to look at that and go, maybe, but maybe not. And if you're that investor, you're looking at risk compounding on risk. You're looking at the regulatory risk of an arbitrary and capricious agency. And how are you going to factor that into your investment decision? So, everybody benefits if we're going to have a government, if we're going to have the state involved in this. And I think most of us would say, yeah, this is probably one of those places where we'd like to have the state involved. Maybe hardcore Austrian school folks would say no, but most of us would say yes.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, then the rules ought to be clearly laid out, and they ought to be applied universally and equitably and predictably. because otherwise business can't do business. Then we're just in another kind of a warlord situation where might makes right, and that doesn't enable innovation. That should be our watchword. That should be what we're focused on. How do we enable innovative products coming to the market in an efficient way to guarantee the health and safety of our general population and to advance that objective? And that is absolutely not what we have right now.
And that 75% funding that comes from the pharma industry, can you explain what the real reason is? I broke down kind of the standard argument that's given, but can you explain the kind of reason of why that's happening? And do you propose that completely be slashed, or that there is some use for pharma?
I think it needs to go away. I think it needs to go away. I think it was justified largely based on the thesis. And remember, a lot of this goes to, as I mentioned, subcontractors. Okay, so this is private industry can do it better than the government, that logic, right? This is the logic that taxpayers should not have to subsidize this large, highly profitable industry by capitalizing a regulatory oversight, which benefits the industry. Well, the way it's set up right now, it definitely benefits the industry, and not in a good way. If taxpayers feel and their elected representatives feel that it is in their interest to have safe and effective products, then they should pay the price for ensuring that they have safe and effective products. They're the ones that are seeking that service and that benefit, and they should pay for that service and that benefit, because if they transfer those expenses off to the industry itself, the industry will pervert the system, and has done so. I mean, it didn't take you don't have to have a 150 IQ to figure out how this goes. This is the kind of thing that any plumber or common laborer or HVAC guy or farmer can see a mile away. This does not take deep insight into the nuances of government affairs to figure out how things get corrupted if you have the fox guarding the hen house or paying for it. I mean, we're in a situation where the fox is paying for the weasel to oversee the hen house.
Right. So that makes sense. So obviously there's going to be a bias among the FDA if they're getting the funding from these pharmaceutical companies, and then they're sending drugs over to get approved.
Well, and as I say, there are multiple vectors. It's coming in from above. It's coming in sideways. Coming from below. People wanting to leave and join the industry. It's coming from congressional pressure. It's coming from executive branch pressure. And it takes a senior administrator in the FDA is not a happy place if you have any kind of a moral structure or conscience. You are constantly subjected to a group of force vectors that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And those poor souls are busy trying to mediate all of this coming at them all the time. No wonder that the 30-something, fast-tracked regulatory affairs professional might be tempted to jump ship and allow their family to have a better home and vacation in the Catskills from now and then.
Yeah. And I just quickly looked up. This is the Prescription Drug User Fee Act of 1992. a mechanism that allowed pharmaceutical companies, for each drug application filed, they could pay these user fees and they could get quicker review times.
Yeah, but everybody's doing it, and so it's just become the norm, and you're back in the same old normal pathway.
Right.
And
so when
quicker review times is a little subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder.
Right. And so if the little guy comes along, and recently we have the example of Lykos Therapeutics for the MDMA therapy for PTSD. So little guy comes along, FDA doesn't have that financial incentive that they would have for the bigger guys.
Who cares? That's so little guy Lykos comes along, MDMA, that's a little sketchy. I don't know. It doesn't have the big marketing push. It's not a breakthrough drug. And nobody's.
It was given breakthrough status, by the way. It was given breakthrough status by the FDA.
Okay, all right, fair enough. But in terms of does it represent a true technical breakthrough as opposed to a breakthrough status? Is this a new drug category that is going to open up a global $10 billion market? Just to put it to frame it up, I used to consult for Novartis. Okay,
yeah,
Novartis would not even look at a market, let alone a drug, that was worth less than $1 billion a year globally. They were not interested. They didn't look at drug candidates. They looked at market size. And then when they identified a market niche that was sufficiently large, then they would go and develop a drug to respond to that, or they'd buy one. Okay, that's how the big boys play. So along comes little Lykos, is there a big lobby behind MDMA treatment? Is this the next AIDS? Is there a huge hue and cry? Are people pushing congressmen? Nah. So is there any emergency here? Oh, I'm a mid-level administrator. This has come across my desk. It's something that my division has to deal with. This is a great opportunity to put some of my newbies on for training.
Right. Yeah, but it's strange to me though, because there's a big boom in this new psychedelic wave that's happening. I just looked up a couple of figures, and it's
it as a big boom. Is this a multi-billion-dollar market?
So a couple things I'm reading here. Observed in 2021, nearly $2 billion USD invested in the psychedelic sector. Forecast to reach 6.4 billion by 2034. Psilocybin, ketamine, it's very much a booming industry. Like if you want to make profit, it seems like you would invest in that area.
Just like THC and marijuana are. You don't have the marketing and legislative relationships that have been developed over time.
Yeah. I still need to parse through some of that because the psychedelic wave, it's very, very popular now. A lot of people are investing. A lot of people are popularizing. People like Joe Rogan, Russell Brand talk a lot about it. It's bizarre to me why the FDA would.
Is Joe Rogan and Russell Brand going to legitimize anything in the eyes of the FDA? That's counterintuitive.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, from the FDA's perspective, if you have people applying for approval of psychedelic therapies, which are increasingly popular, if you're just thinking about it financially, why not?
You're coming off of decades of the war on drugs. So the way that whole ecosystem works, and I know something about that, the National Institute for Drug Abuse would capitalize research into this domain. And literally, if you had findings that a agent that was on the schedule had some benefit, and you publish that, it would tank your ability to get future grants and contracts. Okay? You're coming off. You think about it. You've got a wave of people that have come up through the system that have matured in an environment in which touching these topics was career death.
Mm. Mm.
And you're wanting these people to take a risk, to risk their imagine I'm going to go apply for a job with Pfizer or Novartis or J&J. Well, what did you do when you were with the FDA? Well, I approved a psychedelic. Okay. Forget that interview.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. You're up. I'm sorry. This is the reality. It's not fair. That's my point.
Yeah.
This should be objective, clinical. These are the rules. I don't care whether you're trying to market dog poop. If it has a therapeutic benefit and you can jump through the hoops and show that this is sterile, pure, high test dog poop that absolutely cures cancer, that should be good enough, right? Does it meet purity, sterility, potency, efficacy? That's what we should care about. And that's not today's FDA. This is, as you point out, this is a stratified, kind of multi-tier environment that's highly subject to outside influence, and then once you work your way through that, then you crash into these advisory committees made up of basically of academics that have various perverse incentives to go this way or that way, depending on how their money comes down, both from NIH and from Pharma.
Yeah, and the NIDA bias you're talking about, that plays into FDA, like the war on drugs.
Absolutely. All these people, they all come up through the same system. They've all come up through the same schools, except for these new waves that are coming in. But historically, that's the case. And it certainly isn't the case at the top tier.
Right. So small guy comes along with this new psychedelic therapy, and despite astounding efficacy and very little safety concerns.
If I'm the mid-level administrator and I get the IND for a psychedelic, I'm probably looking for, what political enemy do I have that I can push this off on? Who do I want to hurt? Let's delegate it to them. Because all I'm hearing is risk. If that's the cut of your jib.
Right. Again, despite a lot of public pressure, a lot of progressive liberal politicians, even talking about the benefits of these things, still
maybe that might move the needle.
Yeah.
But this is not a fair system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just until somebody gets in there with a great big toilet brush, it's never going to be fair. And maybe even then. I mean, this is DC.
Again, my point only was with that FDA, and I know this is not your exact topic, although you're providing a lot of insights into this. But again,
I was a regulatory professional at one point in time before all the it hit the fan, and I said that spike was a toxin.
but in general, the fact that a lot of liberal politicians, journalists, people in the media were very pro psychedelic, and they're obviously being a financial, a booming financial industry in this space.
Imagine, picture the regulatory environment at the FDA. Hardly anybody comes to work. They're working from home. They're mostly junior level people. Nobody, is anybody really in charge? And are they reading whatever the San Francisco newspaper is, if there even is one anymore? Or does this make it to CNN? Do we have Sanjay Gupta on CNN, jumping up and down, saying with Big Bird, saying your teenager with depression needs to have a little ketamine trip. Using the metaphor of the jabs, you remind me of Steve Kirsch. When Steve came to me, he asked me for assistance, and he was really perplexed at why he could not get emergency use authorization for the drug that he had paid to have these definitive clinical trials done at U Washington, St. Louis. And so I, as a pro bono, because this is what I used to do for a living, I set up meetings with people at BARDA and some involving FDA, and let him have speak his piece. And he just kept getting back at him. Well, we don't do it that way. That's not, up. And at the end of it, he talked to me and he's just like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. It's not fair. Nothing makes sense. And I'm like, Steve, this is the way things are in the industry now. It's not fair. It's not right. It's not proper. It is. Until we have political leadership at multiple levels, that includes executive branch and legislative, it ain't going to change. And right now, so long as we have drug advertising on television, on CNN, subsidizing CNN, brought to you by Pfizer, you are not going to get any change, because everybody on the inside, it greases their axle.
Right. So you don't have critical media coverage when you have Pfizer paying for CNN bills.
That's that whole ecosystem. Remember, I think I said this, or maybe I've been on too many podcasts already today. The investment that pharma makes is what enables modern corporate media to exist, like MSNBC and CNN. Okay. And the investment is not being made to promote a specific drug. It's to disincentivize media from performing journalism, investigative journalism, that would disclose the malfeasance and problems associated with the pharmaceutical industry. What's the right metaphor? Is it blood money? It's a form of payoff to silence media and investigative journalism that might otherwise look into these various matters that we're discussing and others. The problems with statins. Why don't we focus on health instead of sickness, and all these things? The world is the way it is because that's the way the money wants it to be.
Yeah. And one last question on this, since you have a lot of insight into this and you're really helping me make sense of all this. RFK Jr. and a few people tweeted out with the MDMA decision, as many people were outraged by it, rightly so, that FDA did not approve it, potentially because the whole MDMA protocol, people with severe PTSD, it's a protocol of talk therapy and 3 MDMA sessions. And that's like a 6, 7, 8 month protocol, very different from current standard treatments of SSRIs, lifelong pill prescriptions. They're not very effective for treating PTSD. And so FDA has more of an incentive to approve other kinds of psychiatric medications. And there's so many, the whole ADHD medication.
Another way to phrase that is that pharma has a vested interest in maintaining status quo, as opposed to a breakthrough alternative therapy that would be a fraction of the cost and time. And this gets to the whole logic that the incentives with pharma are to keep us just sufficiently sick so that they can continue to market their product.
But how does that relate to the FDA? I didn't understand fully.
Well,
RFK
remember, the
Jr.'s logic
FDA
there.
is a captured agency. How many times do I have to go around that loop? Okay, FDA.
I understand.
FDA is a dual function agency that both promotes and regulates the pharmaceutical industry, just like CDC is a dual function that promotes and regulates the vaccine industry. Just like the FAA is a dual function agency that both promotes and regulates aviation and Boeing. And USDA with agriculture, and so we have USDA director one after the other that are ex Monsanto. That is the ecosystem. And until that's changed, and how is it going to change? When all the financial incentives are driving towards reinforcing the existing system. Rev, maybe I need to disabuse you of something. The banks and the bond market control everything. The world is controlled by Larry Fink, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and the big banks. That's just the way things are. It's all driven by money. Yeah.
And to just go back to my question, I guess I'm just trying to connect the dots fully there. Like,
so
part
Bobby's
of the FDA.
Point is valid. Everybody's point is valid. Okay, we come up. This is the same point as alternative therapy, early treatment for COVID. I mean, how many times do we have to get hit over the head with a baseball bat to figure this out? Pharma is corrupt,
right.
And pharma has corrupted the government. How many? I can't say it any more bluntly.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Okay. No. I'm understanding. I'm just saying.
Pharma's interests and incentives, and therefore the FDA's interests and incentives, are to drive towards chronic care because it is a profitable business model. Short-term effective therapy that's inexpensive is not in the interests of the pharmaceutical industry, and therefore it's not in the interests of the FDA.
Yeah,
that's the ecosystem.
I guess again. No, I fully understand that.
You're still imagining, Rev. You gotta forgive me. I'm being a grouchy old man now. Please read Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State. Okay, it'll only take you a couple hours. It's the fundamental brief monograph in anarcho-capitalism. You still, bless your heart, believe in the state. No,
I listen. I'm sharing your skepticism. I'm just, in this particular example, I'm just trying to connect the dots here. I see how the pharmaceutical companies have captured the FDA. I'm just trying to understand this whole situation where, yes, you're getting money from Pfizer for Zoloft, SSRIs, and that's treatment for PTSD. I'm just trying to understand the mental gymnastics and incentive structures where, yes, you're getting money that way, but because of that, you're not going to approve this new MDMA thing because because it could lead to those companies, getting less profit down the road for their SSRIs.
Here's how this ecosystem works. Yeah. And the FDA actually encourages this. When you leave the agency and you go to work for pharma, you're encouraged to continue to communicate with the agency as if you are it's functionally it's like you're an alumni.
Yep.
Okay. You're encouraged to maintain those, and it occurs through the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, RAPS. It occurs through phone calls. It occurs through meetings and seminars. You are encouraged to maintain those sockets so that the FDA has ongoing feedback and intelligence from the industry about what the industry wants. Now, those are pretty words, and that's how it's justified. But unpack that, through the lens of the way the world works. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm encouraging you to see through a glass darkly, but this is the way things are. Okay. You leave the agency, you graduate to pharma, and you continue to provide feedback and suggestions and communications and informal information. And, oh, by the way, since you're maintaining those relationships, then when your buddies who are still at the agency decide they need to go buy a Porsche, then you say, come on in, the water's warm. This is how it works. Because we're not incentivizing and paying what it costs to have an autonomous, independent, uncorrupted government oversight function. And oh, by the way, whether it's Administration A or Administration B, whether it's blue or red or left or right or up or down, both sides are going to play into this. Okay, both sides are gonna when they get there. That's what would be revolutionary if Bobby was appointed to be director of HHS. Is Bobby would come in as a seasoned veteran lawyer, battle scarred, of many fights, in a position where he would be able to appoint people downstream. And it's those people, it's those intermediate level positions where all the policy gets made. That's where the sausage gets made. It's not at the level of director of HHS. I wouldn't wish director of HHS on my worst enemy, because you're responsible for Medicare and all kinds of bullshit. Okay, it's just a horrible job. Your cabinet level, everybody's pushing on you. Everybody wants all the time. He's just going to be miserable. But he would be in a position where he could appoint mid-level people that had integrity. That, by the way, that's the big problem that faced Trump in his first administration. I don't think he thought he was going to win, and he didn't have the bench lined up. And basically, the usual DC crowd came in. It was red flavor instead of blue flavor, but it's still the uniparty. And they came in and filled positions for want of anything else. Not that Trump would have, I can't say whether he would have wanted to have people that would have had a more rigorous approach at the FDA. But you end up with fast tracking the likes of Peter Marks because he says all the right things that Pharma wants to hear. And so, the theoretical new president comes in and he says, I gotta find a director of HHS on short notice. Oh, I'm going to get a lawyer who's worked with Pharma before. Well, yeah, Pharma likes that. So Pharma's saying, hey, yeah, Secretary Azar, that sounds like a great idea. And it just, flows downhill from there. That's and then those are the people staffing the mid-level in the top and the mid-level leadership. The top leadership appoints the mid-level leadership. They bring in their buddies, and around it goes. That's the that's the way the world works.
Yeah. And just to clarify what you were saying earlier, I should have interrupted you before when you were talking about how people working for the FDA leave the agency, join Pharma. In response to my question earlier about the psychedelic thing, were you implying that because these individuals working at the FDA, they would be potentially less inclined to approve drugs that would go against other drugs that are funding, and I'm talking about like SSRIs that are funding.
That's what I was trying to say. Right. You don't have to necessarily step on Pfizer's toes. Okay. If you want to go get a job with Pfizer, you could be really good about Pfizer, but if you stepped on Merck's toes, Pfizer's going to know about it. It's all a great big cabal. You know, George Carlin comes to mind. It's all a big club, and you're not in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is a really high level game you're talking about.
Pharma is a cabal.
Yeah. This is something you're really educating me right now. So why would you approve of like these other drugs coming in that would work against drugs that you're being paid for by Pfizer or Merck?
And then you've got it on your CV.
Right.
You've got it on your CV, and you go for your nice, your nice cushy job in the Garden State, and pick up your $500,000 a year plus, and your vacation flat and your luxury German car.
That sounds awesome.
Why jeopardize that?
Right.
So that's why I say, if I'm the mid-level bureaucrat at the FDA and this thing comes across my desk and I've got to delegate it to somebody to run that regulatory team, that I'm not going to give it to the up and coming that I'm trying to mentor and encourage career growth. I'm going to give it to some poor bastard that I don't care whether they get tanked or not.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. But as a counterpoint, again, what I was saying earlier is that, like, despite that incentive, there could also be the other incentive of this particular example, the psychedelic industry now being worth billions of dollars. So in theory, couldn't you have a greater incentive to I'm going to prove this thing, then I'm going to go join. I'm going to go join these new pharmaceutical companies doing these stuff.
Imagine you're this wet behind the ears, new regulatory professional. You've been in the agency for 2 years, and you get this as part of your portfolio. You're gonna turn the crank, and pretty much do whatever your super tells you to do. Keep your head down, you may say, well, it's not gonna be as sweet a deal as if I go to work for the big boys. If I go to work for this alternative niche area, is it going to be sustainable?
Which is booming. Some of these alternative therapies.
Maybe they say to themselves, I don't know. You're giving me. You're really kind of worked up over this one example. But I'm sharing with you that I'm trying to encourage you to see the world through the eyes of the regulatory staff that encounters this problem, because that's what it is, and is thinking strategically about their future as they encounter this regulatory issue. And in the best of all possible worlds, they would not care. They would say, these are the rules. Yeah. We're going to follow the rules. We're going to look at this thing objectively. And we don't care if it's Parmesan cheese or ketamine or lysergic acid diethylamide. All we're going to care about is purity, potency, safety, and efficacy.
Yeah. Again, I was just pointing out. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Again, I was just pointing out the obvious financial incentive to potentially approve psychedelic drugs because it's a booming billion-dollar industry.
Remember that these things, approval does not happen at the level of the committee that is managing the dossier.
Yeah.
Okay. They make recommendations. Yeah. That goes to the next tier. Yeah, that goes to the next tier. Yeah. Then they have this outside committee, blah, 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 blah. And then and by the way, when it gets up to that level, they're busy going, hey, ring, 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 White House. We're thinking about approving this ketamine thing with a psychedelic. What comes down? Are you crazy? Think about how that's going to pull.
Okay. Interesting. See, you're saying there's so many countervailing forces in the other direction that even if this new industry is a booming,
very complex. This is sausage making. It is not clean. It is not pretty. and it has a lot of different forces that go into that casing.
So it's not just merely of, I'm essentially auditioning for the psychedelic companies, which might get me, six-figure salaries. There's other.
It's multi-layered process, subject to external forces all the way up the food chain. And the revolving, you were just picking at the revolving door because you wanted to kind of amplify and dig into that. But it's a lot more complex than just the revolving door. And the revolving door is happening at each level.
Interesting.
I keep blanking on the name of the guy that went to work for Pfizer. He's on the board of directors of Pfizer. And
Scott Gottlieb?
Scott is a case study in this ecosystem. Okay. Scott was fast-tracked. And then suddenly he bailed out of the FDA, said, I got to spend more time with my family. 2 months later, he's on the board of Pfizer. Okay. And then he's busy yapping it up at CNN. And what are they talking about? Ex-FDA director Gottlieb, not Pfizer board member Gottlieb. No. Right? Scott Gottlieb is a case study in how this ecosystem works.
Right. So ex-FDA member joins the review board of Pfizer and then helps facilitate the approval of the Pfizer vaccine because of his connections with the FDA.
Remember what I said? Ring, ring, ring. Hi there. How you doing? Right. Hey, did you hear? Well, we got this new data package. I'm really, really excited about this product. And the world really needs this. We need this technology to move forward because, well, without it, then the bad guys in the Middle East.
Right. Yes. So Gottlieb presumably used some of his FDA connections to help.
In every channel he could. Not the least of which is CNN.
Right. Yeah.
And the Washington Post and the New York Times. I mean,
this has
been... We got a mess. Yeah. You guys, got Justin Trudeau and Krista Friedland, and God bless you. But we've got the imperial capital of the world, deep in advanced, Roman Empire decay.
Listen, this has been thoroughly educational, and you've really helped clarify some things for me. And I genuinely appreciate you. I genuinely appreciate you for explaining some of these things to me because I do not have the experience or the knowledge that you do, but I'm extremely curious and interested. And with this particular example, even as pardon?
Keep asking questions.
Yeah. And particularly the story that I'm covering with the FDA and this MDMA therapy, which I know has helped many, many people, particularly veterans, in trying to make sense of that. That's why I brought that up. And I did not expect to bring that up.
Is absolutely crucial. And I speak as somebody who was diagnosed with PTSD when I had my nervous breakdown and left my graduate degree. Over all the crap that I got over the invention of this bloody technology.
Yes.
I still have psychological scars from that.
And the MDMA, this is I totally not expect to talk about this, but just briefly, the MDMA therapy, the phase 3 studies show about 72% remission rate for individuals who go through these sessions, which the MDMA lowers response levels in the amygdala, which allows people to approach their traumas.
It's a shame, and so if you want to get treated now using that strategy, fill in the blank. What are you going to do? You're going to go offshore.
If you want to currently get treated,
you're going to go offshore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Or you go underground. There's a lot of underground stuff in the U.S.
Yeah. Or you go. I can't tell you how many people I know that periodically clock out for 3/4 of a day and take a little mini ketamine dose. Personally, I'm not going to do it. I'm too aware of my own psyche, but it is common because it works. If you still have PTSD,
I would encourage some curiosity, and I know some people that I would connect you with if you still have PTSD.
I have been approached by the best. Don't worry.
Okay. And just briefly, this is again not the podcast for this, but I would say it is among the most meaningful, transformative experiences I've had to overcome my vices and my various issues and get to the bottom.
Let's just park that. I'm not in the business of sharing my experiences as a 20-something growing up on the Central Coast of California. We'll just park that, okay?
Oh, geez. Now now I'm going to do an investigative deep dive. Go pull up the Robert Malone 25-year-old hippie archives. What substances were taken when and what setting?
Good luck.
All right.
Bobby, Bobby comes out and supports Donald Trump, and the Atlantic Monthly comes out with an article that some SOB is trying to rat him out that he sold him some coke when he was in his 20s. Now, the problem with that, and amplifying that story is that, as Bobby has said, I got so many skeletons in my closet, I can't close the door. Not the least of which is he is an admitted recovered heroin addict. So trying to spin up a story that he sold somebody some coke in the 70s when that was rampant, when he was in his 20s, it just doesn't carry water these days.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Robert, we didn't talk about the new round of boosters. Should we postpone that for a second conversation at some point later this week?
Briefly, this is the problem is a mismatch because the evolution of the virus in the face of a leaky vaccine.
You sure you want to go in this now briefly, or should we save it for another time?
I'll try to cover it briefly. And so,
okay, because we did have a lot of questions about it, and there was a couple things to talk about there. I'm happy to postpone that for another time.
Yeah, all right, fine. We can do it some other time, but
just not to rush you because it is a topic worth getting into.
The punchline is Peter Marks says that he hopes it's going to work, and even the New York Times, in your lead-in, you said that it's not being covered by mainstream media, but New York Times did do an article in which they interviewed people, and the physicians that they interviewed expressed hope that this might work for a couple of months.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that.
This is another
although their spin was very positive,
substituting hope for data.
Yeah, but their spin was still positive for the article, which is my point. You're not going to get critical coverage. Exactly.
Loop
not
back
that
to where
expected
we were.
anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had a good chat.
Okay, I'll look forward to us talking specifically about that because I know the listeners really want that. So we'll do that. But this has been unexpectedly very enlightening on topics I did not plan to talk about today. But I greatly appreciate your insights, and you've really helped me understand some things.
Yep. And
appreciate you explaining the dynamics of the FDA because very few people, they just see it from the outside. They don't know how the sausage is made. And my process as a journalist for the last few years with COVID, vaccines, mRNA technology, vaccine safety is like from being so far from the outside, slowly chipping away and trying to understand and really figure out what's going on behind the scenes. So I really appreciate the insights you're giving behind the scenes because most people have no fucking idea of any of what you just said. So
good.
Appreciate it.
Don't give up hope. I hope it would be lovely, I think, for as long as he could survive it without going barking mad, for Bobby to find himself in the director's chair at HHS or at any of the other agencies. But I think he's too big now for FDA or CDC, and I wouldn't wish him to find himself at CIA, that's or at Director of National Intelligence. I think, and I think he really could do good if he would find himself in that slot. And if he does, I wish him well. And maybe he's going to need some of your MDNA. In a couple of years.
I will not be the one providing or facilitating that, just to be clear.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Ciao.
All right. Until next time.
Has the dust settled from the COVID policy response? Far from it. The storms are many: inflation, learning losses, ill health, high crime, broken government services, displaced workers, substance abuse, mass loneliness, discredited science, real estate crisis, censorship, and overweening state power. The world is on fire with war, mass killings, crime, hunger, revolution. The lack of accountability, or even so much as an apology, is a foreshadowing. They'll keep their newfound powers and try it all again. Brownstone Institute is seeking answers, undertaking important research and publishing the results while providing fellowships for dissident scholars who have been professionally displaced. It's not about this one crisis. We urgently need to restore peace, prosperity, and integrity in science and journalism. Visit brownstone.org for more. We may never get to the truth, but we can get closer to the truth. There will be no stopping the efforts.